The Spotrac Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Welcome to the Spotrac.com podcast. Kevin Sylvester, Paul Peck, along with the founder of Spotrac.com, Mike Giannetti. And I'm saying that right, aren't I, Mike? I know there's a poll right now on Twitter on how to pronounce...
Mass confusion going on right now.
How to pronounce Spotrac, but it's Spotrac.
Right, so we've been around for about 10 years now, and the name itself has probably been the most divisive conversation we've had around the site, right? So 10 years ago, having a name where you took a couple of words and smashed them together, that was kind of like all the rage, right? So we just were following suit at that point. But, 2017 on here, we're at a point where we're explaining the name and pronouncing the name and things like that every single time I hit a radio show. So it's Spotrac according to us. It's Spotrac or Sportrac or Sports Track or whatever it is everywhere else. But technically, the way that we founded it was Spotrac. So
right, which was a mashup of sports contracts.
The spot for sports contracts.
Oh, like that.
Yes,
how about that?
Spotrac.
Yeah.
Yep.
Come on, Paul, do your homework, will you?
It's that easy, guys. It's really that easy.
All right, Spotrac.
I think the key is, before we get into our year-end review here, which we're going to do a lot of cool things and talk about all the players and teams and pages at Spotrac.com that you visited. The cool part is, pronounce it any way you like, just visit.
That's right. Doesn't matter how you say it, as long as you type it in the right way. All right, so speaking of the website itself, Mike, give us an idea as you wrap up the year. What were the most popular parts of Spotrac.com that generated the most interest and traffic from sports fans?
Yeah, so this is a fun time of year because we kind of get to look back and assess the analytics of the site, which we're doing generally, throughout the year as it is for players and teams and all that. But, my developer and stat guy, his name is Scott Allen. He gave me a decent list here.
Are you sure it's not Scote?
Scote, yes.
Very good.
Thank you. Ruined his life now.
Sorry, Scott.
He put together a nice list here of just, the top 5 in terms of pages and players and teams and things like that have come really across the table this year. And I don't think any of them were going to stand out and surprise too many people, but the number one player across the site, I believe for the 3rd straight year, is, of course, Tom Brady. And Tom Brady is unique because Tom Brady is the number 8 page on Spotrac this year, which for a player to be that high on a site like ours that has dozens and dozens of tools and trackers and things like that, it's unheard of. So that stood out immediately that a player, Tom Brady, was that high in terms of our analytics this year. So,
and by the way, that's probably the only time Tom Brady's been high in his life.
Thank you.
Okay. It's the only time he's ever been number 8 in his life, too.
The interesting thing is, why is he this divisive player for people to look at on Spotrac? And it's not that he's making $300 million. It's quite the opposite. It's that every single year he kind of restructures or gets another contract, and it's a middle-of-the-road contract. He's done this his entire career. He's making $1 million salary this year, so people hear that and want to go and see if it's true because it's kind of mind-boggling to a lot of fans. But he has done this continually over his career and just kind of taken the low road in terms of having cap hits that are team-friendly for the Patriots to be able to build around him. And certainly he gets a nice signing bonus every couple of years, but that's probably the reason that annually he's the number 1 player on this list.
And the rest of them are all NBAers, which, again, not a surprise. Yeah,
that's not going to change either. So we've got, obviously, Steph Curry and LeBron James, number 2 and number 3. The next two are a little interesting. Kevin Durant, who, similar to Brady, he switched teams recently, obviously, but he took a bit of a pay cut this year to kind of help the Warriors get everything under the cap in terms of how they're structuring their system. And number 5... right in line is Klay Thompson, which that one really surprised me because
I thought James Harden might be there, right?
Yeah, Westbrook, any of those guys that kind of took the big contracts. Thompson's contract is fine. I mean, he's paid very well for a player of his stature, but I mean, he on that team, he's probably the 6th, 7th most interesting person at this point, right? I mean,
yeah, right.
I mean, so it must be a situation where people are probably anticipating, as we are, that his tenure with Golden State is probably coming to an end soon. And I think you've probably got a lot of talk out there about him being traded, when that contract is going to expire, if that's going to be a situation where he moves on to free agency and gets a massive contract to be a superstar somewhere else. But to me, that's a name that stands out in terms of a top 5 player, and it's probably for reasons of where is he going to be next.
Kevin Durant is interesting to me. I loved him in Oklahoma State. And now with Oklahoma City. Well, he's in Oklahoma, the state of Oklahoma too. But yeah, Oklahoma City, yeah, fan of him, enjoyed watching him play, and now he's with the Warriors. I don't know. He's just kind of turned into an enemy.
He went from being the number one guy on his team to sort of being part of this ensemble group a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny because the optics are bad, right? I mean,
yeah.
I mean his play on the court, his demeanor, some of his off the field stuff, but really contractually, he's kind of done the right thing here. He's, like I said, he's taken a bit of a pay cut to kind of make this team stick together. So he's doing things the right way in terms of contractually getting himself in a good position to be a team player, but the optics of kind of how he's going about his business right now kind of make him a bit of a villain.
Well, I'll tell you the indicator for me, right? And I look at kids and who they want to be when they play video games and such, or when it comes time for basketball shoes for my son, and it was KD. This year it's not KD.
Yeah.
He doesn't even talk about Durant anymore.
And I wonder, because you and I, we've all talked about this on this podcast before, about the future of the NBA being sort of this, the players determining to play together to win championships. Do you wonder if Durant's maybe less than ideal experience in Golden State may cause some of the next wave of guys to say, you know what, I'd rather be the biggest star on my team instead of being on this collection of Hall of Famers on another team?
Well, I certainly think, like I just mentioned with Klay Thompson, you're going to have that second tier of players who are going to think twice, right? Instead of compiling themselves with a team that should win, like Oklahoma City right now.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, go get the money, right? I mean, the money's everywhere, but there is significant money for those superstar elite players, and it's going to come down to, do you want to win, and do you like the players that you're grouping up with, really?
Another thing with NBA players and money, I was just looking at this for an article I was working on for another website, about basketball shoe contracts. And I was looking at shoe contracts for, there's like Westbrook has a $5 million deal with Nike, right? Jordan still has the biggest one, and LeBron's got a huge contract. Curry's moderate money. But Dwayne Wade has a contract with a Chinese sneaker company, Li Ning, I think it could be pronounced like Spotrac. Mm-hmm. $11 million a year he gets from a couple whose sneakers are barely available in the United States, Dwayne Wade.
Yeah, I bet you they sell a lot of them over in China, though.
Yeah, it's kind of like, Stephen Marbury had the Starberries.
Yeah, you're right.
But they were cheap. That was the interesting thing when Marbury had his shoes. They were inexpensive sneakers, so they were affordable. I'm not sure on how much a pair of Dwayne Wade's sneakers go for in China, but that was just fascinating to me that he had a contract.
I'll tell you what, not to get off on a tangent here, but that's just another example of globalization in that league. And I don't know if you saw recently, they've announced an international junior league, the NBA. Have you seen this?
No.
What they've essentially done is replicated Little League baseball for international basketball kids. And they want to create a league where international teams can come together and have tournaments and things like that. And they want to be farming these kids basketball careers from the start, be able to watch these guys grow and develop.
And they'll probably have the uniforms of the logos of the NBA teams on them, right?
You got it. Yeah, the NBA is going to own this entire league. So
brilliant.
I mean, they have got this thing buttoned down in terms of globalization.
That is brilliant.
Team-wise on Spotrac.com, not a surprise if you're a fan in a small market team and you hate all the attention focused on the big market schools. Yeah. There's a reason for our big market teams. There's a reason for that. Your traffic dictates that's what people, whether love them or hate them, want to know all about.
Yeah. So the top two teams are the Yankees and the Dodgers, and that might not sound surprising, but it's the first year that an NFL team has not been the top viewed page on our site. So that makes me happy. I'm a huge baseball guy, so obviously, fans and our audience is going where the money is. The Yankees and the Dodgers have annually spent a ton of money, mostly the Dodgers recently. But obviously, the young kids with the Yankees, the Aaron Judges and the Gary Sanchez's have sparked a ton of interest with that team. And really, the Yankees have played a little money ball over the past couple of years. So their payroll, in terms of how we show it on the site, has been very interesting because they've had to fill in the blanks, with a bunch of their bloated salaries from the past with a lot of youth, a lot of young rookie salaries. And, now we've got some free agent signings coming in. So I think you'll continue to see the Yankees and the Dodgers obviously hit the top of the market in terms of our views. And the Astros and the Cubs are right there with them. And in terms of other sports, the only team that hit the list was the Patriots, number 3 overall. So, obviously no surprise, Super Bowl champions. And if you're going to look at Tom Brady, you're probably going to look at the Patriots page as well.
All right, let's talk about other pages and tools used in the site in the top 5.
Yeah, so like I said, we've got dozens and dozens of tools, but obviously there's a few that are built because they're necessities in terms of how our data needs to be represented. The number one page on our site hopefully will always be is the cap tracker for each sport. So that's where we show a list of the teams and how much they've spent to their cap and how much cap space they have and things like that. And follow that up right away with free agents, which, that was a view we built about 8 years ago. And we keep up with that every single day in terms of our transactions and things like that. So we've got real-time looks at who's going to be available next year, the signings from the last 5 years and things like that. And we do some graphical work on there to show visuals of teams and positions and how they spent their money and over the course of a couple of seasons. So that's by far one of our most popular tools, and it's probably the tool that we put the most work into over the year as well. And the number 3 view, I knew this was going to come when I was doing this list. The number 3 tool on our site right now from 2017 is the fines and suspensions tool. And that's across all 4 sports. That's something we track every single week from these sports. It's taken a lot of steam in the past couple of years, especially with the NFL, obviously, as they've ramped up, their fine system on a weekly basis, really. And the suspensions and the inconsistency of those suspensions is really what's drawing a lot of people, I think, to our site to kind of see how this suspension compares with past ones and different years and things like that. And we've got it kind of shelled out visually so you can see, the reasons for suspensions and fines, the positions, the teams, the total amount that players have been fined over their course of their career and things like that. So it's a nice little tool, and it's an effective tool for the era we're in. But it's unfortunate that a tool like that has to be viewed so much on our site because, like I said, on a weekly basis, these things are coming about.
All right, as you look back and continue to reflect on the year of 2017, tell us who the happiest athletes in all of sports are based on how much money they brought in. And I think the one interesting tidbit as you run down the top 5 that amazes me the most is 2 of the top 5 players on this list were high school buddies and teammates, which is amazing.
Yeah, so obviously the top paid athlete of the year would be Matthew Stafford. That massive signing bonus he got from the Detroit Lions.
What did he do with it all, though? Really, what do you do with $32.5 million?
Yeah, I think he'll be okay.
It's a heck of a Christmas in the Stafford family.
So he'll have amassed $51 million after his second installment of the signing bonus kicks in, which is just an absurd amount of money for one calendar year. But he's followed up by Steph Curry, which actually I didn't even realize this when I was doing the analytics that for 2017 alone, he's the top paid NBA player in terms of the salary. He's approaching $35 million this year. And the interesting thing is you see coming down this list is he joins a group of players who are currently injured. And there's actually a lot of that with the top paid players right now. One of those players who is not injured and is probably having the best year of his career, arguably, is LeBron James. So he's at $33 million this year. That's going to jump up to $36 million next year. And I don't see an end game for him, really. I mean, he needs $100 million to become the highest paid career earner of all time in the NBA. He's going to do that easily in the next 3 years. So he's an interesting guy to follow for sure because he's going to opt out. He's going to be a free agent next year. So, the ceiling could be massive with LeBron James.
Where do you think he goes?
We'll get to that in terms of what to look for next year, but I'm hearing so many reports that seem silly, and then I'm hearing reports of teams like Houston trying to fit him in and make a super team down there, which Houston's won 14 games in a row.
Yeah.
I mean, do they need LeBron James? I don't know, but I don't think it'll be Cleveland. I think that ship has sailed in terms of how they've structured their last couple of years.
L.A. isn't the front runner, you don't think?
I think L.A. is on the list. But I don't know if LeBron James wants to go and try to rebuild a franchise right now. I just don't know if that's in his cards right now,
Does that depend on how much success the Lakers have as the season goes on?
Don't forget there's 2 teams in L.A.
Yeah.
It may not be the Lakers.
Well, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to see him go to a team like the 76ers where these kids have started to establish themselves. I mean, they're winning. They're in the middle of the pack right now. Does a player like that take them right to the top of the list? It's an interesting situation to think about.
It just makes you wonder that, does the lure of potential business interests, LeBron has a home in L.A., he wants to get in the movie business, do those become as much a factor and a reason why he would not go to a Philadelphia 76ers, even though there's a basketball reason for it?
At this point of his career, I'd say no.
No,
I think it's all about basketball for LeBron James right now.
Okay.
I mean, we talked about sneaker deals and things like that. He's got so much of that on the side. I don't know why business would matter at all. To LeBron
he's
James.
It doesn't matter where. It doesn't matter where he's going to play. He could play in Utah
Right.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
No, but he could play in Utah, and he would be big. New York would be intriguing.
Very intriguing.
Yes, for the Knicks. Because Irving's in Boston. You got LeBron in New York.
Right. Fourth on your list is the guy that I referred to before, is Matthew Stafford's buddy from Texas and his old high school friend Clayton Kershaw.
Yeah, you got it. They played baseball together. But Clayton Kershaw and Matthew Stafford are both doing just fine in their post-careers. Clayton Kershaw made $1.2 million a start last year, and that number is going to increase this year based on his salary. The interesting thing about him is he can opt out after 2018. A lot of people don't maybe know that off the top of their head. So the Dodgers will have a situation where if Clayton Kershaw decides to hit free agency, they'll need to extend him to a massive contract. We're looking at a situation where that will most certainly be the highest paid contract in the history of baseball in terms of Clayton Kershaw and the structure of what he already had the biggest contract in his last contract. So similar to Matt Stafford, who had a similar situation, he's going to break the ceiling again in terms of baseball. So after this season, Clayton Kershaw is definitely a name to watch. And then the fifth guy, maybe he's going to raise some eyebrows, but it's Paul Millsap, an NBA player. He took a free agent contract, a 2-year, $61 million contract. He's also injured, long-term injured, but he's making $31 million a year right now in terms of sitting on the bench and
no issues meeting the
in,
deductibles is what you're telling me.
No, he's all right. So there's your top 5 in terms of our highest paid 2017 athletes.
All right, how about the best values of 2017? Flip it around. Doesn't always mean the least amount of money, but it just means return on investment, so to speak.
Yeah, so this is a tool that we kind of hope takes a little more flight in this upcoming year, because we actually do some neat stuff with this. So we'll value players positionally in terms of their production versus their pay, and then we'll also value teams. So you see power rankings and things like that on a lot of other sites. We've got our own list of power rankings, but it's based on the total cap or payroll for that team versus wins and then the production of their players. So we do an actual compilation value of every team to build our little value ranking system. So we've got a team and a player from each sport this year that kind of top the list. Baseball-wise, no surprises. Houston Astros,
maybe one of the
champions.
all-time great return on investments.
Yeah, and we'll get into them a little bit later in terms of how they got there and how people saw them getting there as well. But
it's not like they didn't spend money. It's $149 million.
Yeah, but
they
that's
spent some
15th
cash
in the league.
But that's middle of the pack.
Right in the
that's
middle.
what's amazing about it. It's
Dead
middle
center.
of the pack.
Yep.
And they won a World Series with it. You know,
it's a great story, and from a guy who stares at dollars all day, I love seeing it. I love seeing good, smart financial sense turn into wins. I love that. So, no surprise with the player as well. I mean, Aaron Judge was arguably, the most exciting rookie to watch in the last decade or so. And not to be unmentioned here, but number 2, very, very close to Aaron Judge in terms of our value system, was Jose Altuve. So the Houston Astros were sitting atop this list all over the board. But baseball is going to be fun to watch in terms of how value is going to play in the next couple of years, because, like I said, there's going to be some massive contracts that come up, and we'll talk about that going forward. But it's how teams are going to structure this value, because the good teams all have this right now. They've all got this kind of core system of players that either they've acquired or they've homegrown internationally or through the draft. And value in baseball is going to be very important to watch. So we're excited to keep track of that over the next couple of years.
We talked a lot about the NBA, so we'll skip over that one and tell us about NFL-wise. Who are the best values as teams and players? I think these are interesting names that I would not have expected.
Yeah. The best value team going right now, and I don't see that changing over the next 2 weeks, is the Minnesota Vikings. So, they've clinched themselves a playoff spot in a division there, and they have the 22nd highest cap payroll in the league right now. So obviously they're playing with fire in terms of their quarterback situation going forward, but
because they're not really paying a lot to Bridgewater or obviously Case Keenum,
and there's no high-paid wide receiver on that team.
It's a nice moment, by the way. Sorry to interrupt, but when Bridgewater came into the game,
it was awesome.
Yep.
Wasn't that really cool?
Awesome.
And Case Keenum's over there cheering everybody on. That's a tight team.
All it made me think about though is what's going to happen in March, because I mean they've got
not quite be so nice a moment.
3 agile, able quarterbacks, and none of them have a contract next year. So that's certainly something to watch. In terms of the players, this one stood out too for me. DeMarcus Lawrence, the defensive end for the Cowboys, who, the Cowboys haven't had a barn burner season in terms of what we expected, but he's been phenomenal. I mean, he's on a value contract right now. I think he's got 12.5 sacks. I mean, the numbers across the board have piled up for him, and he's going to be a free agent next year. So he's in a situation where he's about to cash in. The Cowboys probably can't afford him. So that's a name that you're going to watch in terms of that March free agency period.
Because they know they're going to have to pay Prescott and Elliott at some point.
Yeah,
not necessarily soon, but Prescott quicker than Elliott. But
most likely, they can certainly wait and play the Kirk Cousins game with Prescott if they want to. But just in terms of how their finances are structured next year, I don't expect them to be able to retain DeMarcus Lawrence, who's going to bank in on those pass rusher contracts that exceed $15 million a year, I think.
Hockey is interesting because your best value player is only that because his big contract that we all know about hasn't happened yet.
Right. So Connor McDavid, obviously the number 1 overall pick from 3 years ago, he's got 40 points already. We're not even halfway through the season. He's on pace to do what he does. And until that big extension kicks in, he's worth $3.7 million a year. So, it's going to be hard-pressed to find a better value in hockey going forward for this season in terms of how that's going to lay itself out. The team I thought was interesting. I mean, the Tampa Bay Lightning have kind of come out of nowhere here. They've been good, maybe a little better than good over the past couple seasons. They've been certainly playoff-worthy, but they are easily far and away the biggest surprise of the season, and they've got the 9th highest cap in terms of the league. So they got their superstars under contract. They've got good value in guys like Kucherov, who, at $4.5 million a year, arguably the MVP of the league right now at that price is going to be good value. So they've got a couple of good players that they're hitting lightning with, no pun intended, and they're clearly the best value team in the NHL.
Yeah, I think the NHL is perhaps the sport where, NFL too, you have to have young players in those first-year contracts contribute mightily in order to make the cap work, because you have to end up paying players, and you can't pay them all.
You can't miss on draft picks in those leagues.
No,
you just can't.
You cannot.
Well, high draft picks, at least, right? Yeah, you can't do it.
You can't afford to do it. There's no question about that. All right, the final thing in the year in review is kind of a look ahead here on who has the most teams and players, the most to be gained, and I assume with the teams it means most to be gained because they have cap space to spend money, and players because their contracts are coming up and they can make even more moolah.
Yeah, so this is sort of our what to watch segment, right? So I've identified a couple of names and teams here that I'll be watching because I see them with a contract situation or a payroll situation or a cap situation that's interesting. And obviously we've done that per sport. So baseball-wise, the name that stands out and everybody should be paying attention is Bryce Harper, of course. He's heading towards his final year of arbitration, team control essentially, which at $21 million is a nice way to be controlled by your team. But there's been some talks of extensions with him with Washington. I don't ever see that getting done. I think he and his agent are just dying to get to that free agent market just to reset the baseball market from scratch, essentially. I mean, the numbers have been absurd in terms of rumors. We've heard $500-400 million. I don't see it getting there because I've been watching these things progress. It would be an absurd jump to put Bryce Harper on that kind of a contract, especially without an opt-out. Nor should Bryce Harper want a contract that high without an opt-out, right? He should want a similar situation to what Giancarlo Stanton's in, where he can make $150 million, get himself out, switch teams if he needs to, things like that. But certainly in terms of baseball, he and 1 year from now, Clayton Kershaw obviously would be a name to watch.
Does Harper become a Met or a Red Sox?
No.
Oh, no, okay.
No. Does he stay a National?
I don't think he stays in Washington. I would be hard-pressed to not see him a New York Yankee.
Really?
Yeah, I think...
Even with Stanton, Judge, and the guys they already have now?
I mean, look, Stanton's on a 3-year deal in terms of where that opt-out comes in, so there's some inconsistency in terms of the long-term nature of his deal. Brett Gardner's going to be done after this year. Aaron Hicks is under team control for 2 more years, which is just perfect. I think they're going to do everything they can to make this the biggest, baddest outfield in the history of baseball.
Awesome.
Wow.
I can't imagine. I mean, you'll have teams like the Giants and the West Coast, even the Dodgers come in and say, yeah,
he's a West Coast guy, too. He's a Vegas
for sure.
guy. So
for sure, they're going to try. But I think the Yankees are going to put an offer on the table in terms of the roster around him and the money that will change the way people look at the game again.
The teams to watch are 2 teams that nobody really watched much of this year.
No, they're boring. Yeah, they're boring. But they have been trading away and cutting and getting every guy off their team possible to kind of get themselves ready. And we'll talk about why they've done that. But the Philadelphia Phillies and the Chicago White Sox, by far, at some point in the next 18 months are going to just make a flurry of signings or trades just to get themselves back into a winning situation. But they have done a nice job of cleaning house in terms of getting the trimming the fat off that roster over the last 2 years. Switching to basketball, we kind of talked about it, right? The Lakers are easily going to be a team to watch just because of the LeBron factor. You know, they've got kids, they've got minimal cap spent into next season. They're going to have space to do whatever they want to do. It's just who can they acquire? Who can they bring in the fold? There's going to be plenty of available free agents. You're going to see a ton of big names passed around. But it's going to be all about LeBron to the Lakers in terms of the rumor mill next year. And a similar situation is Dallas. Mark Cuban's done a nice job there of kind of what we just talked about in baseball. He's kind of trimmed his fat. He's kind of taken some bloated contracts off. You know, he's done right with Dirk Nowitzki in terms of letting him kind of figure out his end game here, paying him a decent amount of money going along the way. He's made a couple of real nice draft picks. He's got some kids in place, similar to what Los Angeles has out with the Lakers. And that's a dark horse team for LeBron. That's a dark horse team, in my opinion. I think Dallas has a good point guard, a good interior game right now, and they could use a playmaking forward. So you're definitely going to see Mark Cuban make a play for LeBron, no question.
And that's kind of an interesting marriage, too. Cuban and LeBron would be very interesting.
Business powerhouses.
They'll spin off their own show. Shark Tank, it'll be, Braun Tank or something.
The two NFL teams to watch, again, are teams that no one has really wanted to watch very much of this year, but that's all part of how it works in the NFL.
They're very different, though, aren't they?
Yes.
Right? I mean, we've got the Cleveland Browns, obviously, with $110 million to spend, and I don't know, does anybody like any of their players in their team right now? So they're starting from scratch again, and they've got draft picks, maybe 2 top 4 picks is what it looks like now.
Yeah.
I mean,
and a new GM, traditional GM
with some experience. I mean, good experience. So I mean, hopefully that they get their act together here. But they've got money, they've got draft picks. They've got all the time in the world because, I don't see next year being any much better than this year in terms of no matter what they do. So that's one side of the story. Then you got the 49ers who have $100 million to spend as well. But boy, it sure looks like they got their quarterback too.
And that's the huge difference is that Jimmy Garoppolo has been outstanding, and they're going to have to pay him, obviously, because he's a free agent, but they didn't have to give up 3 first-round picks to get him, and now you look like, man, they are set. They could spend all that money everywhere else.
I still think they franchise tag him. I still think they do that, which would be about a $25 million salary. It'll be locked in. Give the guy a whole year to figure this out, put in some pieces around him. But they have some nice pieces there. I mean, some of these wide receivers, these kind of no-name guys, are playing real well right now for Jimmy Garoppolo. So, I mean, they're in a situation where Carlos Hyde, the running back, is a free agent, so they're going to have to make some moves in terms of the running game. And obviously they need to rebuild the offensive line to get a little younger and cheaper. But they've got money. They've got draft picks. They've got a quarterback.
Sharp coach, sharp general manager.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good stuff going on. A nice stadium. They got a lot of positives.
They just need fans to go.
Yeah.
To the games now, right?
They'll come when they start winning.
They're going to be a good draw for free agents this March as well. So that's a team to watch for sure.
Right. And then while we finish off our teams to watch in the coming year, again, a couple of teams that are certainly not big market teams. Matter of fact, one of them in the NHL didn't even exist a year ago.
That's right. So I'll start with the other. The New York Islanders are a team to watch because their best player is probably going to be moving this year. So John Tavares, again, he's got 40 points. I mean, he's right up there with the top players in terms statistically, but he wants out. It sounds like they want him out. It sounds like they don't want to retain him in terms of an extension. So that's going to be a team to watch just because it sounds like they're probably going to rebuild mode and they're going to move their biggest player.
And I believe, as we record this, they just announced that they're going to move back to Long Island. They're going to start a project where they're going to build a new arena at Belmont Park, which gets them out of Brooklyn and back to Long Island, and all part of a whole rebuilding of their franchise.
Well, there you go. Yeah, that's going to be a team that's going to need probably a lot of new pieces this offseason. A team that's already pretty good but has a ton of cap to spend next year is Vegas. The Golden Knights out there who are winning. They have good players who are overproducing right now. I mean, they're going to be obviously they're a draw for free agents being in that city and being new and fresh and
good.
Shiny. Yeah, and they're
winning.
winning.
A great coach. Gallant's a great coach.
That's right. And they've got money to burn. I mean, they're not paying anybody massively high at all right now. So they've got money to spend. They're going to be trade deadline team to watch. They're going to be a free agent team to watch, and they are on an early upswing with that franchise.
All right, we have even more to get to here on the Spotrac.com podcast.
today's Cap Fact.
All right, the cap fact today, Mike, is the amount of money that teams have spent during the year. And again, it always varies. The caps are one thing, but the amount of money that teams will spend to bring free agents in or cash above cap, below cap, all that stuff. So what your cap fact is today is pretty much who spent the most money in 2017.
Yeah, so one of the things we do on the site outside of just track these salary caps and payrolls is we actually track the cash, right? So Matthew Stafford earned $51 million cash, even though his cap hit is, $16 million this year. And it's important to keep those things separate. So we do a decent job of tracking separately in terms of the different ways we look at the league and the teams and the players. So we've got numbers this year in terms of how much cumulative cash was spent across all four leagues. And really, there's no surprises here. I mean, the NFL has the most players, so you're going to see a lot of money there. But they spent $5.2 billion in cash just to players this year. That's bonuses, that's salaries, that's all that fun stuff mixed together. And that ranges all the way down to $2.1 million for the NHL this year. So there's a big jump in terms of how the leagues and their cash kind of payouts are spent.
It's fascinating. They can spend $5.2 billion on players' salaries, yet they have to take a postcard to figure out a first down.
Good point.
Whatever works.
Good point.
Whatever works.
And even more amazing than that, most of that $5.2 billion is covered by TV contracts, right?
Yeah.
So
Easily.
everything, the TV contracts almost cover all of the salaries, and then everything that the teams earn from jersey sales, ticket sales, parking, all that stuff is above and beyond.
Well, and the other thing to look at is this is just cash doled out, right? None of this is guaranteed, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, certainly the signing bonuses and all that are guaranteed money, but generally speaking, these salaries that are doled out are not guaranteed, and with the injuries that come into the league, it's always something to look at. And right along with that, the Detroit Lions obviously are going to have the most cash payroll this year with that $50 million spent in Matthew Stafford. So they lead the league in terms of the NFL cash spending. The Dodgers are your top baseball spenders. That's probably going to be the same this coming year. The NBA was interesting. I thought there's a couple of super teams out there, but the Boston Celtics lead the 2017 spenders in terms of how much they've doled out. And that's interesting because of how they got there, right? They brought in Kyrie Irving, but they also brought in Gordon Hayward. So they brought in a big trade piece. They brought in a big free agent piece in Gordon Hayward, and they had high draft picks. So they had to spend on first-round picks. So that compilation altogether actually made them the highest cash spenders in the NBA this year. And the Washington Capitals lead the NHL, which has been the case for a couple of years now, just because they've got Ovechkin under contract for about 40 years, and they've always been massive free agent spenders. So that's going to be a bad formula for cash spending.
Time now for the contract of the week.
The contract of the year is also the name of the year in sports, and I'm going to set Mike up with this one. And Paul, correct me when I'm wrong.
That's right.
Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Close enough.
Antetokounmpo.
More commonly known as the Greek Freak for the Milwaukee Bucks.
Imagine being Ted Davis, the voice of the Bucks. I know Ted and having to say that. You just think you go freak the whole time.
Oh, absolutely. You absolutely go come up with a nickname that you don't have to say the whole name.
I think he says it in the shower every morning just to get himself ready.
Yeah, right.
You know what? It's a cool name, and he's a great player.
It's great. Yeah, he's we're awarding him our contract of the year, and it's not because it's huge, and it's not because it's long term. It's just because the Bucks kind of got on him early. They kind of got this done last year, seeing what was coming from him, and he has produced massively. He's on a 4-year, $100 million contract, no opt-outs. It's $25 million a year through 2020. He's 23 years old, and he's averaging 30 points and 11 rebounds a game. So, I mean, and $25 million sounds like a lot. So. Really what's happening here is by this time next year, $25 million a year is going to be about 32nd in the league in terms of how that's going to rank. So, I mean, you're going to have players up near $40 million a year, $45 million a year after all these extensions kick in for the 2018 season. So to have a guy who's 30 and 11 with $25 million a year, you're going to get value for the next 4 years.
That is slightly more than they paid Paul McKeskey back in the day.
Yeah, it's gotten a little crazy.
What did Quinn Buckner make in his heyday? All right, honorable mention contract of the year. Again, pretty off the radar here, as when we talk about the NFL, it's almost always quarterbacks or pass rushers.
Yeah, I took a look at contracts that were kind of done on purpose. And really what happened here is the Eagles brought in Alshon Jeffrey on a 1-year deal, because they weren't sure that he was worth a 2-year deal, and really no other teams were willing to make a multi-year contract to Alshon Jeffrey. Well, what he's done is he's turned $9.5 million into $52 million over the course of 8 months, with obviously the Eagles' big play, and he's been a big part of that. So he's got $26 million guaranteed over the next 2.5 seasons in terms of how that's structured, and he gets honorable mention just because he was able to accept a 1-year deal knowing he could turn that into big money.
By the way, give the Eagles credit for bringing Nick Foles back into the fold. And, Carson Wentz was so great. It's so unfortunate to see the injury to him. But you know what? They've got a capable quarterback in Nick Foles.
They have been habitually the biggest spenders at the quarterback position, even when they gave Chase Daniel a huge $10 million a year backup quarterback contract. People ripped him for it.
They're still paying Chase Daniel. and Nick Foles is worth $7.5 million next year as a backup. So he is... Yeah, he's there for a reason, and he's showing why for sure. But it's going to be tough to keep him on the roster next year at that money.
But it's smart to pay the most important position to make sure that you're covered in case something happens.
We talked about it last week. There's depth in the running back position. When will there be depth in the quarterback position? It's going to be in need with these injuries.
All right, as we wrap up 2017, I know there's some other closing thoughts that you have, Mike, on what you've seen and delivered to the visitors of Spotrac.com over the year.
Yeah, so I just wanted to take a moment here to kind of assess how things have gone. We've kind of talked about the best values and a look at how kind of cash and cap has been spent throughout the year across the 4 sports. And really, it's a system that's come into fold in terms of how these teams are structuring their franchises. As the new year turns, you're going to start talking off-season in football, and obviously the winter meetings in baseball will kick into full force, and NBA contracts and extensions will be talked about because of the big free agent season coming up next summer. So, all these leagues are kind of going to turn the page with the new year. And really what's important to remember here is teams aren't spending like they used to. They're just not doing it. You're not going to see in March teams spend $200 million on free agents to rebuild their roster outside of the Browns. But really the most important thing here, and you've heard it time and time again from media outlets, teams have a process. They have a plan in place, and there's no better example of that than the Houston Astros. The Houston Astros have been getting this plan in order for 3.5 to 4 years. They have been drafting. They have been using international bonus money to bring in players, and they're doing it with a purpose. They're not just going to get the best guy available for name and marketing purposes and to kind of get TV ratings. They've had a plan in place. They've used their money smartly. They've invested in free agents when they need to, just to get them through this process, to get them to the point where they knew they could be. And that point was 2017. And there was no better identification of that than the Sports Illustrated cover from 2014 that literally predicted that in 2017 this would happen. This was a 3.5-year process of drafting, signing, slow free agent play, smart free agent play, and then obviously trades and where trades were available. And they were able to ramp it up in 2017 early, win enough games to get themselves in a position to spend through the trade deadline like they did with Justin Verlander and a couple other pieces. But it got them through the gate. It got them the championship that they knew they could get to if they carried out the plan properly. That's the process. That's what people are talking about with the Philadelphia 76ers. That's what the 49ers appear to be doing. They have been slow playing this for a couple of years now. And they went early and they went and got their quarterback. And that's what the Eagles did with Wentz. That's what the Rams did with Goff. There's two ways to look at this going into the new year, right? It's, do you have the assets available to make your team better? And do you have a structured plan in place to use those assets with? And are you willing to take positions of value and of importance, like the quarterback position, like home run hitters? Are you willing to do more than necessary to get that done? The Rams and the Eagles and the 49ers both exceeded their boundaries to get their quarterback, and it's paid off handsomely for them.
And are your organization and your fans willing to have something that doesn't exist very much in the world today, which is patience?
Patience.
Because some of that plan is always going to mean they're going to be a couple of tough years.
A plan, patience, but then the persistence to get what you need, right? I mean, Carson Wentz was supposed to be a Cleveland Brown. Let's be honest here. Right? And the Titans certainly could have taken Jared Goff and done what they needed with him, but there were teams who were ready to pounce. They did so, and I think that's a plan that needs to be enacted more. I mean, what the 49ers did with Jimmy Garoppolo this year could be unprecedented in terms of the league. You just don't see quarterbacks move like that, and they were able to do so on a minimal basis They're going to be able to slow play his payroll over the next couple of years because of the way that the system is structured. And they now probably feel comfortable building a great team around him with $100 million to spend. So they clearly had a plan in place. They clearly, and maybe Garoppolo wasn't the name. Maybe there was another player identified as plan A or plan B, but they saw an opportunity. They took a position of importance and they made a risky move to get him. And now they've got assets and hopefully a structured plan in place. So this season, when you're looking at the numbers and you're looking at Spotrac and you're looking at free agent news coming around, it's not going to be about who's making the most money, but it's about, does the player that's being signed fit the process? Does it fit the plan? Does it fit the team? Does it fit the system? Does it fit my defense, my offense? It's more about, is the plan in place and can you enact that plan going forward?
And going forward, it is all about the payroll. And that's what Spotrac.com brings to you, the payrolls of all the teams, all those contracts. Great stuff, and we look forward to being back with you in 2018 here on the Spotrac.com podcast.